Hello there. Welcome to this episode of Force Ghost Conversations. This is your host, Anthony King, and this week I'm going to take a deep dive look into Andor Episode 8 titled Narkina 5. Before we get started, I'm inviting you to join the conversation with us. We can be found on Twitter at Force Ghost Pod. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok just by searching Force Ghost Conversations. We look forward to connecting with you on those platforms. Also, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on your listening site of choice. Finally, please be sure to check out our TeePublic store to buy some Force Ghost Conversations merchandise. And without further ado, it is time to gather around the campfire for some Force Ghost Conversations. All right, welcome back, everybody. I'm so excited to get into this week's episode of Andor and to discuss all the great things that happen, and I don't want to spoil too much just in case people didn't get the chance to see it yet, which, what are you doing? Come on, watch it and then come back to this episode. But we'll do what we traditionally do on this show first before we get into the main spoiler topic discussion segment, which is our news rundown called Cloud City Gossip. Now, first, the new animated series Tales of the Jedi is now available on Disney Plus, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, the highly anticipated series is now available. I have seen all 6 episodes, and they are just spectacular. We will certainly be covering all 6 episodes with deep dive looks in the coming weeks here on Force Ghost Conversations, so get ready for all of that goodness coming your way. Also, a new report from Variety is saying that famed producer Damon Lindelof will be putting together a new Star Wars film. The movie is in talks to be directed by Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy, who worked on the recent Ms. Marvel Disney Plus show. Also, Lindelof is slated to be co-writing the film alongside Justin Britt Gibson. We have minimal information at this point about the film, where it would be set during the Star Wars timeline, or even when it would be released. Now, Lucasfilm themselves, though, have not publicly confirmed this news either, so please take this information with a grain of salt until such time. Now, also, since Variety is a respected Hollywood publication, we will keep tabs on this story until reason to believe otherwise. And of course, we will continue to share more details on Force Ghost Conversations as they arise. So that's pretty cool, pretty interesting. I will reserve judgment until I get more concrete details about this about the movie, if it's really happening, when it will take place, and all that stuff. I know Lucasfilm has announced a litany of Star Wars films over the past couple of years that have not been made or even in production at various points and have stalled after getting the ball rolling. So I will just cautiously be optimistic until I have more concrete details. With that, everybody, that is all the news for Star Wars this week. We will be back on the other side of this short break with our deep dive discussion into Andor Episode 8, Narkina 5. We'll be right back, folks. Okay, everyone, it is time for our Andor Episode 8 deep dive discussion. Now, the episode is called Narkina 5 and is directed by Toby Haynes and written by Beau Willimon. Now, this is Beau Willimon's first foray into the Andor writers circle, but this is the first time that we have a returning director coming back to helm some episodes for the series. Toby Haynes directed episodes 1, 2, and 3 for Andor, which you may recall is that first overarching arc for the series that really got the ball rolling and set the tone for what this series and show is overall. So that's really exciting, and I personally love what he's done so far with this episode and the series. So let's get into all the spoiler stuff for this episode, right? If you haven't watched the episode yet, pause this podcast episode right now. go watch the episode, come right back to this point in time. Everything after this point is fair game for spoiler warnings. You are warned accordingly. Now, back to last week's episode, we got left on a pretty big cliffhanger. Cassian has been captured by the Imperials and will certainly be taken to a prison somewhere in the galaxy. Now, to this point, this is probably the most precarious and drastic position that Cassian has been placed under. He at least had some familiarity on Ferrix, and he had a crew surrounding him during the heist on Aldani. And then at this point, he's all by himself, and we don't know where he's going. We're kind of on this journey with him at this point. Now, I don't remember if I mentioned it in last week's episode or not, but seeing shore troopers again in Star Wars is really cool. It's also a nice connection to Rogue One, which, basically is what Andor is overall. After his sentencing, Cassian is put onto a transport ship that is bound for Narkina 5, the namesake of this episode, of course. This place is the prison where Cassian will be spending his prison sentence that was dished out to him at the end of the last week's episode. Now, from a filmmaking perspective, I thought that the juxtaposition in the cut between Cassian's story and Cyril Karn's is really neat. To me, it showcases the duality of the Empire at this point in time: fear-mongering and control, and bureaucracy. Both of which will play into the hands of the rebellion later on. That was just something neat that I thought was worthy of pointing out there. Also, kudos to the filmmakers for adding such tension and drama into this series. Although we know Cassian's endgame, the journey is just as treacherous, and the fact that we get to experience this with him and see it through his eyes, I mean, it only adds to really the great portrayal that Diego Luna is putting together for us on screen here. But as terms of an audience member sitting there and digesting it all at the same time, I too feel my heart racing, beating extensively. My breath's getting shorter. Right, this is exactly what you want out of this thriller series. Now, ISB agent Miro has contacted Cyril Karn and brought him in for questioning to learn more about the original Ferrix incident. Now, Cyril, of course, is not putting his previous misdoings to bed, and he's still on the hunt for Cassian, filing 6 false inquiries about him and his current position. He is unrelenting in his pursuit of Cassian, and like I said before, Cassian is now the bane of his existence. Narkina 5, though, back to Cassian's story, is a wild place for a prison, if you ask me. It looks like most of it is underwater, and that's pretty cool. The ship structure kind of reminds me of the Colossus from Star Wars Resistance, and if you haven't watched that show yet, make sure you go check that out on Disney Plus now, and I think you'll agree with me after you see what the Colossus really is. It is also reminiscent of the superhero prison facility from Captain America Civil War. The premise is the same, at least. Back in the ISB headquarters, though, Yularen, Wolf Yularen, is absolutely sending me to new heights with his lack of interest, if you will, in what the ISB, particularly Dedra Miro, is proposing. Cassian's name and hollow picture is presented in front of the group for his role in the Ferrix ordeal that started this whole mess. Dedra is doing her best to present her findings and connecting the dots to the larger rebel activity taking place across the galaxy. Now, something of interest thus far from the conversation is that they have given a code name to Luthen. Since they obviously do not know his name at this point, the code name that they've given him is called Axis, which is because of his centrality to the rebellion cause. Dedril wants to drill down on Ferrix in order to find Cassian and then use him as a resource or a tool to identify really who Axis is, so that the domino effect to the other rebel cells can take place and they can remove them accordingly. It's a bold strategy, so we'll see how it does or doesn't pay off in the coming episodes. Now, for Narkina 5 overall, it is an Imperial factory. These prisoners are basically forced laborers against their will to support the Empire. They also have basically shocking mechanisms in the floor that helps to enforce pain and order and structure across this facility. Now, I will say, that is utterly brilliant. Not that I'm rooting for the Empire here, but it's probably the best idea I have ever seen in terms of trying to instill order amidst potential chaos. The troopers and their malice, too, is also similar to the feeling that one would get while riding Rise of the Resistance at either Disneyland or Walt Disney World Resort. Now, it's good connective tissue across the mediums there, if you ask me. Cyril Karn, in his interrogation with Dedra Miro, makes the case for his importance in trying to find Andor to help him bring down to help bring down Cassian, if you will. It is almost like he is begging to help in this regard. Karn appears to be willing to go to any length in order to clear his name and to be of service to the Empire. And honestly, can you blame him after what we've seen in the last couple of episodes? This dude probably wants to get away from his mom at the earliest convenience and at any cost possible, or any chance possible, if you will. Miro does not accept his offer and reminds him to stop his search for Cassian unless he wants further consequences from the ISB. We'll see how that plays out again. I don't think this man is able to turn that part of his brain off, if you ask me. And now the series overall, especially in this episode, for what Cassian is doing on Narkina 5, the series really switches to full THX 1138 or THX 1138, depending on however you want to say it. Now, if you haven't seen it yet, of course I'm referring to a movie here, THX 1138. It is George Lucas's student film from his time at USC that won several accolades and was later expanded to be a full-length feature film. His first, in fact. It is also about a prisoner escape that can be very artsy at times. And it's definitely worth the watch, and you'll probably immediately see the inspiration that this episode brought in for this connective tissue. Now, Cassian is a part of Unit 52D for his work shifts. He is then greeted, well, I shouldn't necessarily say greeted, since that indicates a sense of welcome. He is spoken to, I feel like that's more accurate, by Kino Loy. And Kino Loy is the unit manager for 52D, and character is portrayed by none other than Star Wars alum Andy Serkis. Now, what a treat for this episode! I was not expecting that whatsoever, and I just about, it took me out of it for a second because I was in such joy and elation to see this wonderful actor back on screen again. And for those that don't know, Andy Serkis did the voice and motion capture for Supreme Leader Snoke in both The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. He's also a well-renowned Hollywood actor, most famously known for his role as Gollum, or Smeagol, if you will, in The Lord of the Rings, and he also played Caesar from the recent Planet of the Apes trilogy. Now, Kino Loy basically runs the unit to make sure everything is operating efficiently. He says, "You're mine now," to Cassian, as he has a lot of autonomy over running this unit, right? It's that interesting point of the Imperials give them a sense of this autonomy with incentives and punishments, of course, instilled if productivity measures aren't met. But it's for themselves in order to not have as many people stationed there and overseeing all this stuff, right? When you can just appoint one person to handle those tasks for yourself, it allows for fewer officers to be posted across, and of course less payroll. It just makes sense overall to do so. Now, he also mentions productivity is encouraged and evaluation is constant. Now, Star Wars certainly did their homework, in my opinion, in depicting factory life. Now, as someone who has both worked in a warehouse for several months and is the product of generations of factory workers, I think that they got the nuance of constant evaluation, tests, and sprints for more productivity absolutely correct. Everything overall at the end of the day is about performance and meeting the bottom line. Now, Cassian has the incentive to make his table the most productive of the unit, and Kino Loy also has the incentive to make the overall unit the best among the others in that level. Now, this level of thinking turns people into zombies, though, if you ask me. Cassian's group, we learn, comprises of Jembach, or his table, I should say, his group table group, if you will. Jembach, Zal, Taga, Ulaf, Ham, I think, maybe not Ham. I don't know why I said Han. Ham, whatever. Let's get to the last person here. It's Melshi. Melshi. It is so great to see Melshi back in the fold. Now, again, for those back at home, this is a character that premiered in Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. Look up a picture of Melshi online in Rogue One. You'll probably go, "Oh yeah, that guy. He's from He's a part of the rebel troops on Scarif in the final battle. And I'm glad that we get to see his journey too towards the rebellion and seemingly how he and Cassian have been together for most of the way. Now, a sprint is set into play since productivity levels appear to be lower than expected. Punishments will be provided for the least performing table in the sprint. And for what they are building, I have seen speculation online that it is for an undercarriage leg attachments to a Viper droid or Imperial probe droid unit. Now, that is pretty interesting. We'll see if that plays out in later episodes because I doubt they'll just leave that kind of thread hanging. The story then shifts to Mon Mothma, who is at another party on Coruscant with her husband, Perrin. And I'm not sure what worm like drink, they call it squigs, I think, is that they're having here. And it's also, squigs is just a fun little aside there because my dog is named Squiggy. And we also I call her Squigs for short, at least sometimes. And I guess that's what they call the worm that is put into the beverage itself that makes it fizz and have this like fuzz like effect as it enters into the liquid. And I hope that we get to see this at Galaxy's Edge one of these days. If you go on the StarWars.com website, they already have the how you put this drink together mix. It involves a lot of gelatin and stuff like that. And I think it's like lemon lime soda basically. So you can actually make this at home if you really want to while you're watching the next episode of Andor. Just go check it out on StarWars.com and put it together. And I could spend hours, honestly, talking about the inner workings of the politics here and the conversations being had during this party, if you will. There are also real world implications that seem to be influencing the writing of this show, but however, for the sake of brevity, I will move on accordingly. Perhaps that will be more the focus of a specific episode when Star Wars content is not at a premium somewhere down the line. And the business with Coma definitely continues with Mon Mothma. However, it looks like things with the banking regulations are becoming increasingly difficult. And from this party, my overall takeaway is that leading the double life for Mom Mothma, it seems to be taking a toll on her. But perhaps that is just my opinion. It must be so difficult as a person to be both a mother, a spouse, a politician, a senator, trying to do good in the world, but also literally leading a rebellion, probably the most dangerous position you cannot possibly be put in right now. Now, back on Narkina 5, we get a little bit more about the inner workings of how everything kind of functions, if you will. Everything basically is like you're in a pod, you have your bed there, you got your toilet, you got like a tube that feeds you. And it sounds absolutely disgusting in terms of what the food comes through. The incentive for being the top table over the course of your shift is that you win flavor. Right? You get to taste your food. It's not just like dry gruel, if you will. There are incentives, obviously, to being in production and being in the best here, and losers obviously get fried, like Cassie and his table evidently received since they were at the bottom of the shift this day. Now, the members of his table ask Cassian about PORD, Public Order Resentencing Directive. Each of the inmates evidently had their remaining sentence numbers doubled recently, surely a result of what happened on Aldhani. They ask him if he heard about the public order or the rebel activity. I'm sure that Cassian has no idea whatsoever about this public order, but he certainly knows about the rebel activity since he was a part of that Aldhani team. Now, Cassian is surely lying about that one, and keeping this information close to his chest is probably to his best interest. But he is now seeing the immediate impacts of the people who suffer from what he helped to cause, and as a result of just the Empire just continuing to feel like they're losing grip on their power. Back on Coruscant, we learned that Perrin and Mon Mothma had an arranged marriage. That certainly tracks based on their interactions. It is clear that they probably never had any feelings for each other and are stuck in their current situation based on the tradition and customs of their culture. Now we'll see how that, of course, sticks out as the course of the season goes on. The work on Narkina 5 looks awfully monotonous, if you ask me. Again, these people basically become zombies, and that is basically the nature of factory work. If you ever get have that pleasure, if you, I guess, day in and day out. I mean, guy literally ends himself because it is a never-ending cycle where about Melshi literally says, "Don't look at the time on your sentence," because they have that in their pod there. Yeah, however many days you have left or shifts you have left, right? It's listed there, and honestly, they have a full power over you now. This is literally you have no autonomy whatsoever. It may seem like you do, but you really don't. You're not going anywhere. You don't even get to breathe fresh air. You're not even barely taking up any space. It's not an exciting life right now. And back on Ferrex, Brasso and Bix check in on Marva, and she seems to be struggling in Cassian's absence. Now, Marva is a true rebel through and through, and she's looking into troop movements, analyzing potential weaknesses, but she's riding out that storm in her home. She's not going anywhere else. Her health is clearly declining. She likes to be freezing all the time. B2 can only do so much. And without Cassian there being a familial influence on her, what else can really Bix and Brasso do? Now, in the distance, we see both Vel and Cinta spying on Bix and Brasso. Now, Cinta apparently escaped from Aldani and has met up with Vel on her journey to find Cassian to remove that loose end from the heist. Cinta wants to stay, even though they have no idea if Cassian will potentially show up. It's the best lead that they have. And clearly, Vel and Cinta have some sort of relationship with each other, whether it be romantic or not. Cinta is in deep in the cause of the rebellion, though, and is willing to do whatever means necessary. In her mind, the hierarchical order is the rebellion first, then Vel. Whatever they have for each other to Cinta is not above her work against the Empire, and I'm not sure Vel holds the same values. She says, quote, "The struggle will always come first. We take what is left." And there is always a cost to things, right? And that is, in Cinta's mind, the cost of her working for the rebellion is the relationship that she has with Vel. Bix then tries to contact Luthen in search of Cassian because they realize that Marva is not doing well. And did anyone spot the Jedi Temple guard mask in Luthen's shop? I certainly gravitated right to it, and that's a really cool Easter egg for those at home. Now, Luthen wants to make contact so they have a better chance of finding Cassian. He's the loose end that is making Luthen slip at the end of the day, and Clea wants Luthen to put it away so that he does not make another mistake here. He orders her to shut down the frequency, and I think that is the right play overall. Cassian will have to make a choice to support the rebellion or not to. Nothing else that Luthen or his team can do at this point will change his mind. It will have to be a personal choice. Now, in the end, Cinta does stay on Ferrex and Vel goes away, and to where we do not know yet. But Luthen focuses his actions elsewhere and heads off to this planet called Segra Milo. Now, on Segra Milo, we are immediately greeted with a familiar face from Rogue One, a Star Wars story. Now, I'm not sure if it is either Edriel or his brother Benthic, but it is one of the two Tubes twins or brothers from Rogue One. And you know what that means when you see one of those two. It is time to see Saw Gerrera, ladies and gentlemen. Now, Saw has an outpost here, and Saw Gerrera is none other than portrayed by the fantastic actor Forrest Whitaker. Saw Gerrera, of course, started in Star Wars Clone Wars in an arc that was about Jedi not getting involved in a local civil war, basically, but training some partisan separatists. So he's basically Saw Gerrera in many ways the first rebel, if you will. He also is portrayed in Star Wars: The Bad Batch. There's a few episodes of Star Wars Rebels where he's involved, and the overall arc of this character is great. Even gosh, how could I forget Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order is in that game as well. So Saw Gerrera is certainly one of the most pivotal characters in this time period. And they immediately get to discussing the Aldani event, both Saw and Luthen. The secrecy of these two is very real, and neither wants to make a budge in giving each other the more information than need. Luthen wants to sell him some materials in exchange to meet an Anto Krieger. Krieger evidently has a plan to attack an Imperial facility, and Luthen is trying to create more collaboration among the rebels' cells by having Saw work together with him. And on the other hand, Saw is having none of it, though. He says, "I work alone." Luthen suggests to Saw that they need the Empire to come down hard on the galaxy and the rebel cells in order to establish a unified front. Quote, "Oppression breeds rebellion." Saw is upset at the suggestion of these two potentially working together, and he makes note of all the different ideologies that fight under the banner of rebellion, and he notes that they are all lost. He asks Luthen directly, "What are you, Luthen?" Luthen responds with this great quote here: "I am a coward. I'm a man who's terrified the Empire's power will grow beyond the point where we can do anything to stop it. I'm the one who says we'll die with nothing if we don't put aside our petty differences." And then Saul responds back, "I'm the only one with clarity of purpose." Now, Luthen is clearly doing his best here, but it doesn't seem that Saw is going to budge whatsoever, and we know that it's true with what's going to happen later on, as we have the benefit of knowing that. The interaction between these two is just really spectacular, if you ask me. The fact that we got Saw Gerrera so close um, in this series now and so close to the events of Rogue One is really special. I know that there's a Jyn Erso running around the galaxy somewhere that he left behind with a blaster. Go read the book Rebel Rising if you want to hear about that story a bit more. But Luthen is absolutely right here. And I'm a little surprised that Saw doesn't see the value in that whatsoever, in putting aside his own differences with others in order to achieve that same goal. Even though he says, "I'm the one with clarity of purpose," right? I think defeating the Empire should be numero uno, right? Doesn't matter who you work with sometimes in order to get that. And Luthen is absolutely right. Like, if they just keep living in this situation, the Empire's just going to keep taking until there's nothing absolutely left to fight for. I maybe sees it differently later on. Maybe this is a like a subtle plug for an event that will happen later on. But it just goes to show you how vastly different that each of these various rebel cell units across the galaxy are. And the real miracle it is that eventually they do come together to form this unified rebellion. I think it only makes me appreciate what we get later on in the original trilogy, that the fact that there is such a thing. And especially in Rogue One too, where you get to see a bit more of the inner politicsings of it take place, where there's an alliance, if you will, and all the members of, like, the leaders of the alliance, Admiral Raddus and so on and so forth, around that big table, they're discussing, what do we do? Do we attack Scarif? Do we send in a garrison? Do we just disband the rebellion together? Right? These are important questions that need to be discussed and put to the table. But the only way to do that is to come to the table. And it looks like Saul's not even prepared to come to the table at this point, even with another potential person that can help advance their cause. Now, the episode pretty much ends with Bix about to be brutally interrogated. They want information about Andor, the ISB does, and it does not matter who they harm in order to get what they need. And we're left on that big cliffhanger, folks. And this is just really great. Andor just keeps putting out hit after hit with each passing episode. And the next episode is going to be real special, if you ask me. Maybe we just get more time with them on Narkina 5. Perhaps we get the someone discovers that Cassian is who he is and what he did on Aldhani on Narkina 5, and that causes some turmoil and tension. Perhaps someone discovers that he's on Narkina 5, and they are able to create this incredible heist in order to remove him or save him from the space. I have a sense that all this is going to go down in the next episode, and I hope that you are all ready and willing to come along on this excellent journey here that has been Andor. This is just wow. I mean, of course, the episodes are very much packed full of dialogue and exposition, but each sentence is beautifully crafted in order to make a point come across, to emulate aspects of our real life and society, and to help us learn about who we are as people. What does it mean to be a rebellion? What does it mean to fight back against oppression and tyranny? These are all big themes that come across in this series, and I cannot wait until next week's episode. We'll be back next week, breaking down episode 9 of Andor. If you want to follow along in the conversation, because I certainly want to hear your thoughts on this series and this episode in particular, reach out to us on our social media channels. We can find on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. Just search Force Ghost Conversations and we'll be there in some capacity. Also, be sure to check out our TeePublic store if you like Force Ghost Conversations logos. We have both our Star Wars logo and our Willow inspired logo, because that's coming around the corner. And, feel free to purchase that, support the show, and wear your Force Ghost Conversations pride anywhere and everywhere. But with all that, everybody, that is it for this week's episode. I hope that you enjoyed it and will continue to come back next week. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your favorite podcast listening site. Tell your friends about all of us, and we'll continue to grow the proverbial seats around the Force Ghost Conversations campfire. With that, everybody, again, we'll be back next week with a brand new episode. I hope that you have a wonderful week. May the Force be with you.